Welcome to Talking Federal Business. I'm Nick Vlahovic, consultant to industry, and I'm going to share with you my 5 big differences between doing business with the government, that's the federal government, and the private sector. And by private sector, I mean everything but federal government. We'll just lump them all into one. Now, before I get into them, if you could please click like on this video, I'd really appreciate it. And if you subscribe to my channel, I'd appreciate it even more. And thanks in advance. So here's the list. The first big difference between doing business with the government and the private sector is that doing business with the government is a rules-based process. And those rules are governed by what's called the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR. There's nothing like it in the private sector, in any kind of government or the private sector. They may have their RCWs in states and everything, but not with anything like the clout and the amount of process that the FAR does in the federal government. And why is that? Because the federal government has way more money to spend, so there's way more risk. Now, what the FAR does is it defines all of the processes that are involved from the very start, from developing the needs of the client, all the way through award and to final closeout and administration of the awarded project by the agency. So it's very, very complete. And for you and I, what's extremely important is it defines the steps that the agency has to go through leading up to making an advertisement. And not only does it define those steps, it defines the sub-processes for each of those steps. So I hope you're following me there, because if you can understand the steps and the sub-processes, and you can get to the owners of those steps with those sub-processes, that means you can bring some value to them. And the FAR does address meeting with agency people who own those processes, and it is allowed as long as you're not fox in the henhouse, and they certainly know where the lines are there, so you've really got no worries there. But it is allowed. So that's what the FAR does, and it is very, very different and makes doing business with federal agencies and the government different than the private sector. The second difference between doing business with the government and the private sector is the lack of a facilities manager. Federal agencies, I would say 90% of them, do not have a traditional facilities manager, person with that title, as exists in the private sector. And that person is an extremely important person, and there have to be billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of industries that are affected by the role of the facilities manager in the private sector. And that role with that title just does not exist within federal agencies. But that doesn't mean the need for what that person, all the things that that person does, goes away, because it doesn't. What happens is all of those responsibilities that are usually owned by the facilities manager in the private sector get doled out and decentralized to lots of different people with different roles throughout the main agency, that agency, and different agencies. And there's not enough time on this video to describe all that. So what does all that mean? What all that means is there's more risk in federal agencies when they do business, especially with complex things like construction. And that also means, because there's more risk and complexity, that industry, you and I, can bring value to them. Because if we bring smart value and competent value, that's helping them and building trust, and they're more willing to want to work with us. So that's the second big difference between government and agencies, the lack of facilities managers. The third big difference between government and the private sector is the government's focus on their priorities around helping socio-economic disadvantaged groups. No other customer or market out there focuses on helping socio-economic, economically disadvantaged groups like the federal government does. And they should, frankly. The federal government has the most purchasing power of any organization on earth by far. So what they want to do is they want to give a leg up to those groups that over time have been disadvantaged and need a leg up and could use a leg up from the federal government. And these would be groups such as disabled veterans. I mean, that group's had issues and challenges ever since the Revolutionary War. Women-owned businesses, businesses that are located in economically disadvantaged areas where there isn't a lot of business, but they've made the investment to locate there. So those companies that can get certified that they meet those categories, and I've only listed 3 of them, can pursue business that is set aside within agencies specifically for businesses that meet those certifications. And the federal government requires agencies to meet certain objectives in each of those categories, so that business is always there. That's really great to be able to help out those businesses. And frankly, businesses that are not certified that way are not left out, because often companies with those certifications do not have the resources and horsepower to do the work, so they joint venture with companies that do have the resources and horsepower. They divide it 51-49. So it ends up being a win-win all the way around. And so the federal government really should be commended for their focus on helping groups that really need a helping hand, and good for them. So the 4th difference between government and the private sector is the government's use of what's called the GSA Schedules program. The GSA, the General Services Administration, second mission, their first mission is managing government real estate, but their second mission is to help federal agencies in doing business with the private sector and make it easy for them. And they do that through their GSA schedule or GSA contracts program. And basically, a GSA contract is just that. It's a contract put into place by the General Services Administration, a federal agency, to make it easy for agencies and companies in specific industries to do business with one another. And there are specific industries that this program is set up for, such as office furniture, where I came from, facility services, consulting, hospital equipment, office supplies, and it goes on endlessly from there. And what the GSA does is they pre-vet 2 areas. One, they pre-negotiate pricing, so that the pricing is fair and reasonable, so the agency doesn't need to worry about that when they go to do business with a schedule holder. And they also have filters around product and service quality control, so that the agency doesn't need to worry about that as well. So what that translates to is a simpler buying process for the buying agency. So as a result, they don't have to go to RFQ. They can just go to, RFP. They can go to RFQ, request for quotes. They can just request quotes. So the process is more efficient, faster, cleaner, less mistakes, and it's better for everybody all the way around. So that's the objective of the GSA Schedules program. And other sectors of the economy have tried to mimic the GSA Schedules program, but there's nothing out there like it. And it's a very, very well-run program by the GSA. So that's the 4th difference. The 5th difference between the government and the private sector is the role of the contracting officer. There is nobody with the role or title of contracting officer in the private sector. I'm sure you know that. The contracting officer is an amalgam of the following 4 roles in the private sector, I would say. CFO, Chief Financial Officer, attorney, project manager, and purchasing agent. That's a very complex role for a person that has to be highly trained and is highly intelligent and has a lot of responsibility. They have so much responsibility and they're so highly trained that the U.S. government endows them with the role and responsibility of being able to obligate the U.S. government contractually with private sector companies in order for the U.S. government to do business. But when I say U.S. government, I mean federal agencies, to contractually do business with the private sector. And that's a big deal. Contract law, federal government contracts. So that is their role, and they can be held personally and even legally responsible for what they do or don't do. And they have been held legally responsible historically. So it's an incredibly important job, and it's an important role for us in industry to be aware of as well. And the FAR actually says, and by the way, they are the keeper of the FAR. They are responsible for knowing the FAR. And part of the FAR says that contracting officers are to stay educated from the private sector. That's you and I. So they're busy people. They're not easy to get to, but they can be gotten to in order to for you and I to provide education on our industries, and I highly recommend you do. So that's the list. That's the 5 differences between government and industry. If it was helpful, if this list was helpful, I'd love it if you'd leave a comment below, and even more if you'd like this video and subscribe to my channel. Hey, thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. I will see you next time down the road. I'm Nick Vlahovic, consultant to industry.